When you remove God from your life, when you remove God from the lives of a nation, people will try to fill that hole with something. If it's not lust, if it's not love of money, it can be anything. As our nation and culture rejects Christ, so we embrace destructive values and immorality. I was reading this week about a German philosopher that lived in the 19th century named Friedrich Nietzsche. And essentially he believed in a concept called existentialism. He was an atheist, and a lot of his writings focused on morality and religion and science. He often questioned the basis of good and evil, believing that heaven was the world of ideas and not an actual place. One of his most famous works is called God is Dead, where he writes that with the development of science and the emergence of a secular world, we are killing Christianity. And that's where the term God is dead comes from. Not that God is actually dead, but that God is dead in our life. God is dead in our world, in our civilization. America 2022 is the most atheistic and secular version so far. Screens dominate every part of our life. We have the world of information at our fingertips. We can connect with virtually anyone at any time through social media. Our entertainment sources are infinite. Science has come so far that our arrogance has compelled us to replace God with science. Capital S, science. And as a result, we've created this luxurious, wealthy, convenient society where we have food, an overabundance of food. We have every creature comfort relatively available at any time, and it can be delivered right to our front door. But what we have lost is wisdom and replaced it with arrogance. And yet America is broken. We have so much political corruption, so much anxiety, so much mental illness, so much depression and suicide. We have turned away from the order that God has created and rejected it for chaos. We are told in order to live a good life, to live out the American dream, we must live for ourselves. And happiness is the most important objective. Your truth doesn't have to be the truth as long as it makes you happy. If denying your biological sex in favor of taking cross-sex hormones, having surgery, and changing your pronouns makes you happy, does it really matter if statistically it doesn't actually solve the root of the problem? If being promiscuous makes you happy, does it really matter that it can lead you to depression, diseases, or broken families? If getting drunk every weekend makes you happy, does it really matter that it can bring you and your family to destruction? Liberty and freedom are the values and the aspirations that are almost unique to America. But there's an idea that freedom is being able to live in sin however you want. And to an extent, maybe there's some merit there. But the reality is that living in sin feels like freedom, but it's actually making you a slave to your sin. Sexual lust, for example, seeking pleasures of the flesh in order to make one happy, can lead to porn addiction, perversions that get darker and darker as you go down that rabbit hole. There's pedophilia, there's hookup culture, which seems like a good thing, but In fact, it leads to emptiness, depression, adultery, disease, broken families, all of the things that matter in building up our civilization. What about if you have someone who replaces God with the love of money? There's a lot of that in our society as well. Then we start to reach the end road of that, which is greed. Then that breeds political corruption. Politicians will embrace whatever ideology will give them more money, like advocating for abortion on demand, regardless of the millions of preborn lives being taken. It can lead politicians to coerce and manipulate the population, like as was seen with a certain jabby jab, lying to people and saying that it was effective in stopping transmission, when now they came out and said actually it wasn't even tested before going to market. Love of money. Politicians will advocate for destructive policies and garner support through manipulation of emotions, like making a parent feel like if their supposedly transgender son wants to become a girl, and if they don't go in down the gender affirming care route, they manipulate the emotions to feel like, well, wouldn't you rather have a trans son than a dead daughter through suicide? Even though that child cannot possibly be mature enough to understand the implications of such a decision so early. But of course, the gender bending industry is making people very wealthy. And so there we have the love of money. But the corruption doesn't stop with the politicians. It also leads to corporate corruption, which is kind of what we're seeing now with a lot of the virtue signaling for movements that are Marxist in nature, destructive if you actually logically think them out. ESG scores being adopted by these corporations at the high levels. You have things like Black Lives Matter pop up. You have the fake white supremacy narrative, all of which is a big lie. You have the apocalyptic narrative about climate change. Whoa! Give all the politicians your power, because it financially benefits them. But of course, greed won't stop there, folks. It will lead to violence through warfare. Government contractors are a revolving door with politicians who are financially incentivized, and the rest of the war machine goes on from wars, so they will propagandize literally anything that leads to or maintains military conflict. When you remove God from your life, when you remove God from the lives of a nation, people will try to fill that hole with something. If it's not lust, if it's not love of money, it can be anything. Because we as a nation are removing ourselves from the light of Jesus, our souls are struggling with the fallout. We're seeking meaning because we are more than just flesh and mind, but also spirit too. Our spirits are designed for worship and to have true meaning. And when we remove ourselves from Jesus, we will find it in the creation instead of the creator. An example of this that comes to my mind is, like I mentioned earlier, climate change activism. And while I view it as a huge political stunt, it also highlights how people are worshiping nature to the point that they view humanity as a cancer or as parasites to Mother Earth. I think even Nancy Pelosi even said the whole Mother Earth thing. So people are much more open to buying into the destructive policies in order to fix this problem with climate change because they worship nature. People will also replace God with astrology and zodiac. And while I've never been into that, there are people who are religious about it. And sadly, it's not going to bring them the happiness, and the promises will not be delivered. People will also seek God from within. They see themselves as the God. They have divinity. And the only real authority that we as humans, in their view, have to submit to is our own ego and our own pride. Touching on the idea that I mentioned at the top of the video about existentialism and how our American society has elevated science and those that we deem experts as arbiters of truth, as if they cannot be corrupted, despite the fact that science is a method whose aim is to discover the nature of physical reality. But the physical reality is not the only reality, and it misses a huge portion of what is true and what our reality is, speaking on the spiritual. Not to mention academic corruption, corporate corruption in funding that goes behind these studies. And if a study or the results of a study go against special interests, then they might not get the money. Okay, so I know that this episode has been so far a lot of doom and gloom and genuine despairing over the state of our beautiful nation. But I really do believe that there's hope. I think as we continue to fall and our world becomes darker and we feel the consequences of our godlessness, even if we can't put the language to it, I think people are going to start to see through the smoke screens. And those of us who have invited the Holy Spirit to dwell within us have a responsibility to do our best to speak truth so that when people are looking for it, they can find the gospel, they can find what is good and right and true. They are going to see the facade of these, like I have been talking about, these idols that we've propped up as God, and see that it's all empty. So don't give up hope. Be bold and be sure to put God first. And thanks for joining me on today's video. This is Bold Reflections. Subscribe, follow, all of the things. Click the notification bell. And as always, God bless. If that was bold enough for you, then consider subscribing to help the channel grow. Don't forget to like and comment to help get the algorithm on our side.